Hi, everybody. Today is Wednesday, January 22nd, 2025, and our friend Ray McGovern is back with us. Welcome back.
Thank you.
Ray, let's get started with the situation of immigration in the United States, which is bringing so much tensions within the society. Here is Donald Trump. Here is a bishop at the church talking about this, and Donald Trump listening to her.
In the name of our God, I ask you to have mercy upon the people in our country who are scared now. There are gay, lesbian, and transgender children in Democratic, Republican, and independent families, some who fear for their lives. And the people who pick our crops and clean our office buildings, who labor in poultry farms and meat packing plants, who wash the dishes after we eat in restaurants and work the night shifts in hospitals, they may not be citizens or have the proper documentation. But the vast majority of immigrants are not criminals. They pay taxes and are good neighbors. They are faithful members of our churches and mosques, synagogues, wadara, and temples. I ask you to have mercy, Mr. President, on those in our communities whose children fear that their parents will be taken away, and that you help those who are fleeing war zones and persecution in their own lands to find compassion and welcome here. Our God teaches us that we are to be merciful to the stranger, for we were all once strangers in this land. May God grant us the strength and courage to honor the dignity of every human being, to speak the truth to one another in love, and walk humbly with each other and our God for the good of all people in this nation and the world.
And here is Donald Trump's response. And after that, he said that she should apologize to the public. And he's calling her a radical left hardline Trump hater. And this type of rhetoric on the part of Donald Trump. How do you find it, Ray, and this situation with the immigrants and the way that they're confronting each other or they're talking to each other?
Well, Nima, there's lots to say here. The notion about bringing politics, protecting the stranger, the widow, the orphan, the refugee, that was confronting people that lived during Jesus of Nazareth's time. And he indeed could have retired and lived and died as a major Hebrew prophet if he didn't speak out for the orphan, the refugee, and the widow. In other words, bringing politics in this was if you have faith without good works, if you can tolerate justice, as that famous rabbi said one time, we're not all guilty, but we are all responsible, looking on when injustice takes place. Indifference to justice is more evil than justice itself. Now, this is not only Christian tradition, this is being human, in my view. Kurt Vonnegut, my favorite author, he was asked one time, how about this Jesus? How about this Jesus of Nazareth? What do you think? And he said, well, hello, I don't know if he was God or not. But if he hadn't said those beautiful words in the Sermon on the Mount, I think I'd rather just be a crocodile than a human being. Okay, what do you mean by that? My God, he had seen the worst of it. Vonnegut was captured during the Battle of the Bulge at the end of World War II, and he was spared being killed in Dresden during that firebombing because he was in a meat locker at a slaughterhouse, okay? And his job after that as a POW, okay, was to pick up the pieces of the body. So he knew what evil was like. And what he's saying is, look, this is a human thing. One of those Sermon on the Mount things was, blessed are the merciful, for they shall be shown mercy. Now, at one time I made a big mistake. I was out in Berkeley speaking to a rather progressive crowd, but they put me up with a very well-to-do person who lived on the top of the mountain there, you know, and he was Jewish. And my little speech drew on my tradition, Jesus' tradition, and it just said, now, Jesus would not tolerate torture. I mean, so it affects me personally because I pretend, or I try to be a follower of Jesus of Nazareth, and torture is just beyond it. So he reams me out, this host of mine, after that. He says, you know, I really appreciate your tradition, McGovern. But for God's sake, you don't have to be a Christian. You don't have to be from the Abraham tradition to realize that torture is always dead wrong, for God's sake. So get off that little pony here and just realize that you don't have to appeal to Jesus for that. It's a human thing, okay? So that's what this very courageous bishop, Bishop Booty, who is head bishop of the National Cathedral. That's a big deal. I mean, when I was around in Washington just 2 decades ago, there were only 2 bishops, women bishops, consecrated to be bishops at the National Cathedral. So here she has this opportunity. What happened the previous day? Oh, all kinds of nice incantations, all kinds of introductions, all kinds of comments at the end by male people representing what they say was the Christian church. Never a word about genocide, never a word about refugees. And she picked up the gauntlet there and said, okay, this is my chance. I'm going to tell Trump 10 yards away from me, face to face, what real Christians believe, and that is you take care of the poorest, the so-called preferential option for the poor. Actually, the Catholic bishops spell that out 20 years ago, 30 years ago, when they said courageously, here's what the preferential option for the poor is. No one is justified in accumulating still more wealth that he or she doesn't need when others lack the base necessities of life, end quote. Now, those bishops were appointed by Pope John the 23rd, the good Pope. Since then, it's been a different story. I won't comment on that. But, you know, even before the lady Bishop Booty made these comments, I had tweeted out an appeal to mosques and churches and synagogues. Look, we are all from the same tradition. We need to take care of the poor, especially the refugee, give them sanctuary. It's an old tradition, for God's sake. It's very, very widespread. And give them sanctuary. Open the doors of your churches and the synagogues and mosques. Welcome the stranger in there and don't let ICE in. Now, it's easy for me to say, but if I were around, I would be at the door trying to prevent people from being scooped up and sent either to prison or back to their homeland where they have suffered persecution. So when she said, look, aliens, illegal people, when she said, look, be merciful to the stranger, even though strangers may not be citizens. Hey, guess what? In the early Jewish tradition, the whole business was that strangers were defined as people without citizenship, okay, people without the rights that the rest of the people in ancient Israel enjoyed. So it's a very, very clear message. And so what I'm saying, will people take care of these? The last thing is I'll just say is that when she said they may not be citizens, but they're strangers in the land, and we were all at one time strangers in this land, and that's true, except for Native Americans, and Nima, what we settlers did to the Native Americans. So let me just finish here very quickly with saying that I got all kinds of reaction to my second tweet when I said, "Hey, the Bishop Booty is speaking from our tradition." Here's one comment. Look, Ray. The bishop needs to remember, quote, "Render to Caesar what's Caesar's. The law matters." Okay, that's one way of looking at it. And I don't disparage people who think that temporal laws override the laws that Jesus preached. But my response to him was, look, biblical justice. Now, there's American justice and there's biblical justice. They're very, very different. Biblical justice is biased and prejudiced to the core. In America, we have this, this lady blindfolded, of all things, not looking at either scale because it's got to be equal. The biblical concept of justice is prejudice to the core. And as I pointed out to this person, even the word for justice, the Hebrew word derived from the Aramaic word tzedkah, denotes, its definition is showing mercy to the poor. So in the Bible, the word justice means showing mercy to the poor. Now, I didn't get an answer to that, but there has been all kinds of one more comment here. This woman cross-dressing as a bishop, there you go, should read Thomas Aquinas about, a foreigner shouldn't commit crimes in our country. And so she's doing ideological things, says this. Well, let me just finish by saying, well, I've said enough about the biblical concept of justice, but what about Aquinas? Well, if you're going to quote Aquinas, you should really remember that he was pretty good on things like virtue, Aristotle, but he's really, really bad on women. He explained how it came to be that women were created. It was just a terrible mistake, says Thomas Aquinas. Women were conceived at a time when the moon was not quite in the right place. So if you're going to quote Aquinas, and I'll just say one more thing on this. This business about rendering to Caesar what is properly Caesar's. Well, in that same passage, Jesus is asked, are you a king? And he says, you got it all wrong. I'm a king, but my kingdom doesn't have anything to do with the way you have arranged things, okay? My kingdom is not of this world. The Greek word in the scriptures is cosmos. Cosmos. That means the way you arrange things. That's the way the stars are arranged. That's the way you arrange your face. If you're a woman, you get a cosmetic, right? So Jesus is saying, yeah, okay, you could call me a king, but it's a completely different arrangement. And my arrangement has to do with showing mercy to the poor, to the refugee, the stranger, the widow, and the orphan. It's very clear. It's in Leviticus as well. So what I'm saying here is that here's a chance for people to speak up and say, yes, this is the interpretation that the scriptures have been given over the last several decades, okay? It's good exegesis. This business about Jesus being a king and all that stuff and why they killed him, that's for the birds. They killed him because he spoke up for the refugee, for the widow and for the orphan. And now there's a culture war of major significance here, with Trump himself saying, oh, so she got into politics. Well, if you can live amid injustice without speaking out, then, as Thomas Aquinas said about virtue, you are unjust. And he said one more thing. He said that the worst thing is what he called unnecessary patience, because it sows the seeds of vice, it nourishes negligence, and it encourages not only good people, but bad people, not only bad people, but good people to do evil, okay? So that's the corollary of Thomas's talk about virtue and the virtue of justice. I mean, if you don't have justice, says Thomas Aquinas, justice is the basis for all other virtue. If you have no justice, the rest of virtue is for the birds, in the colloquial terms. Thanks for letting me do this little thing. It's really important. We are in the minority, but many of us have already spoken out in support of Bishop Booty. And it took a woman with courage, to reflect what the real Jesus would say. Whether Trump and his colleague there, J.D. Vance, did you see J.D. Vance seeking a little support from his wife, who is not a Catholic? Okay. She's stony-faced. He said, so, you know, Vance has got to think this thing through. Will he be a Catholic with the Catholic bishops acting as they did during World War II, not finding their voice? Or will he listen to a broader interpretation, as John the 23rd advocated? Look, there's lots of truths in other faiths. There's lots of truths in the Episcopalians as well as the Jewish tradition. Listen. And Vance didn't want to. At one time, not shown in the film you just, he looked over at Trump for, oh my God. What are we going to do now? Well, you know what they're going to do now. Trump has spoken. This was a disgrace. Other people have called it a disgrace. And so there's a culture war. I know where I stand. And if ICE comes to where I live now, I'll be in the door of these churches, the ones that give sanctuary to the poor, to the refugee, to the stranger, and to the, to so forth. So thanks for letting me talk about that. It's the most important thing that happened yesterday, at least. There's lots else to talk about, and I know you have that in mind. Thanks.
Thank you, Ray, for your wisdom. And Ray, let's talk about the situation of, before going to the Gaza and Ukraine. We had Trump's inauguration speech, in which many people we were thinking that he's going to brag about the ceasefire in Gaza. He was responsible for that. But he didn't mention that much, the situation of the ceasefire. What is happening in the mind of Donald Trump, and why he's not bragging that much about it?
Well, on the ceasefire, I think he knows that Netanyahu is going to violate it before we're finished speaking here. That may be one reason. But, it's curious. The other thing he didn't say anything about was Ukraine, for God's sake. These are important issues. Now, one take from that is they're not that important to Donald Trump right now. There's ample evidence that even though Trump is continuing to be misinformed on Ukraine, he sees that the end is in sight, and he's willing to talk to the Russians. He just doesn't realize just yet how strong the Russian position is and how near to the end the Ukrainian armed forces are. So it's interesting that he chose to speak about these other things, many of them sort of cultural war things. I mean, the homosexual issue, the transgender issue, all this business, instead of what he could have said, as virtually every other president would have and did say, and an inaugural address. So my takeaway from that is that Ukraine is near the bottom of the agenda. He's going to try to deal with it, and hopefully he'll become better informed. 1 million Russian soldiers dead? Who the hell is telling Trump that, you know? Who is telling him that the Russian economy is plummeting and is really, really, so maybe, yeah, I'll probably do more sanctions. My God, you know, that's like digging a hole deeper when you can't get out. So maybe these guys from the CIA who have been misleading Bill Burns and President Biden, maybe they will be thrown out. And maybe he'll have the courage to say, look, tell me the real story here. I'm a big boy. I can stand it, okay? Are the Ukrainians really losing? And the answer, the honest answer would be, well, not yet, but maybe in 2 weeks, definitively, right? And so your hand is very weak, Mr. Trump. You ought to get up to speed on what the realities are. The sanctions have helped Russia. People they've damaged, the Europeans, for God's sake, and to the extent other people, India and other people. Russia's economy grew by almost 4% last year, for God's sake. You ought to know that, Mr. President. So I'm hopeful that with new leadership in the intelligence community, they'll be told the truth for once. And there is some indication that even in the last gasp, Bill Burns, not very much well known for telling the truth, witnessed the fact that in July of 2023, he told President Biden, Putin has already lost in Ukraine and his army has been discredited for the whole world to see. July 2023. Well, that's the bad news. The good news is that just 10 days ago, Bill Burns said, look, Iran is not working on a nuclear weapon. We know that since 2007 from a national intelligence estimate approved unanimously by all the then 16 intelligence agencies and expressed with great confidence, okay? Now, we decided then that they had stopped working on a nuclear weapon at the end of 2003, okay, and had not resumed work. And we have reiterated that judgment every year since. And now I am reiterating it itself when Blinken and Sullivan are talking about, oh, maybe we ought to do Iran on the way out, or let Israel do it, okay? So there's a little harbinger of truth coming out, even of Bill Burns. Maybe he just wanted to not let himself be totally discredited, be able to write his memoirs. I did tell him that that we held firm in our intelligence judgment. It's the only hold firm that I've seen Bill Burns. Good riddance.
Hey, you mentioned Donald Trump talking about the casualties on the part of Russians, which was so much exaggerated, and just underestimating the casualties on the part of Ukraine. Here is what he said in terms of the sanction, Ray, as you mentioned.
Doesn't come to the table to negotiate with you, will you put additional sanctions on Russia?
Sounds likely.
And do you think that the war should be frozen currently along
The
the
war should have never
lines?
started. If you had a competent president, which you didn't, the war wouldn't have happened. Never. By the way, Russia never would have gone into Ukraine. I had a very strong understanding with Putin that it would have never, ever happened. He disrespected Biden. Very simple. He disrespects people. He's smart. He understands. He disrespected Biden.
Keep sending weapons to Ukraine, or are you going to turn off the tap soon?
Well, we're looking at that. We're talking to Zelensky. We're going to be talking with President Putin very soon.
The key point is that Putin disrespected Biden. What evidence does he have to say that? And in what sense did he do that?
Well, if you go back to the first and only person-to-person summit they had on June 16, 2021, before the invasion of Ukraine, you will see a President Biden, who bragged after that summit of saying, now, this is pretty much verbatim, I want to not be too particular about what I told President Putin, but, he's got a real problem with that China. Thousands of miles of border with China. China aspiring to be not only the most powerful economic power, but also military power. China is squeezing Russia. So he's got that problem. I just want to say that we're in good shape, but he's got that problem. Now, I said at the time, I wrote at the time, that was incredibly naive and totally wrong. And I could see Putin watching the boob tube as Biden made these final remarks on the tarmac on the plane going home from Geneva. I could see him turning to his associates and saying, huh? Huh? Does he really believe that? My God, this squeezing of Russia by China is a fraternal embrace. And if further proof were needed, Xi Jinping and Putin had a 95-minute talk right as the inauguration was proceeding. I think it was immediately after it. And they ostentatiously said, we compared notes on everything. And Xi Jinping said, our alliance is becoming still stronger. There's no upper limit to it, as we have said for 4 years now. That's the big earthquake in international relations. And the clowns, Sullivan and Blinken, they were advising Biden before the Geneva tete-a-tete on the 16th of June, 2021, didn't get it. And they spent the next 3 years trying to create a wedge between China and Russia. And the Russians and the Chinese are up to that game. Trump very cleverly invited Xi Jinping to the inauguration, right? And he did get a deputy prime minister or something coming there, right? But, Xi Jinping calls Putin, and their conversation talked about, what the invitation was like. And so they're not going to drive any wedge between an implacable power that thinks it can lord itself over the rest of the world. Those days are over. A pity that Blinken, Sullivan, and Biden never got that message. And there are warning signs from Trump himself. I counted 3 times during his inaugural address where he made the mistake of saying, we the United States of America, are the sole exceptional power in the world. My God. Albright, Secretary Madeleine Albright, set that stage, okay? And that sort of allowed us to do whatever we wanted. And when there was progress in relations with Russia, and there was in 2013, when, in a word, Putin pulled Obama's coals out of the fire by enabling the destruction of Syrian chemical weapons and making it unnecessary for Obama to strike out with Tomahawk missiles on Syria. That was the acme. And I just remember, folks, I've said this before, I think, on this program, that at that time, the 12th of December, 2013, Lord behold, Biden, Putin has an op-ed in the New York Times, last paragraph of which says, I really appreciate me, Putin, the growing trust, not only between our two countries, but between President Obama and myself. The only thing I object to is the notion that there are exceptional countries. Okay. Now, there are small countries, big countries. There are countries closer to democracy and others farther away. But when the good Lord looks down on all countries in the world, he considers them all equal, period, end quote. I've got that to memory, okay? Now, whoa, growing trust. with this objection, not a minor objection. Okay, I was told that he penned that last paragraph in himself. Okay, so what's the deal here? It took Biden's, or it took Obama's in those days, advisors just 6 months. Victoria Nuland bragging about $5 billion being given to Ukraine's aspirations to join the West. And then in February 2014, count the months, 6 months, all of a sudden, the growing trust turned into no trust. Acme down to nadir in our relations. So exceptionalism is really important. And, you know, it's not only stupid to say it, but it does not reflect reality. And to the degree they believe this, to the degree that Trump thinks really that the U.S. can throw its weight around in the world as it has been able to do since World War II, for God's sake, let's face it. Well, that's passé. And, you know, one thing you can look at is the German elections coming up in just 1 month. Man, it's pretty much over. There is active debate in the part of leading German parties as to how close they should be to a country that most of them know blew up the Nord Stream pipeline to deprive them of the gas they needed to run their industries and to heat their homes. So things have changed. And this exceptionalism is very, very troublesome because a lot of the people either believe it or profess to believe it. That leads to ruin, not only in places like Ukraine, but against China, and even in the Middle East or Southwest Asia, what we call it now, because Trump is not in charge, and you know whatever Netanyahu does. It'll be interesting, and I think Netanyahu will certainly violate the ceasefire. It will be interesting to see if Trump is able to overcome all the pressure, the political pressure that the Israel lobby exists and all the money from Adelson and everybody else, whether he'll be able to stand up and say, well, no, I told you not to do this. I brokered the ceasefire. Now there'll be consequences. I'd love to live to see that. I think that's a less than even chance.
Ray, here is what Donald Trump said about the ceasefire.
Then that you can keep the ceasefire in Gaza and conclude the 3 phases of this deal.
I'm not confident. That's not our war, it's their war, but I'm not confident. But I think they're very weakened on the other side.
Do you support the 2-state?
Gaza, boy, I looked at a picture of Gaza. Gaza is like a massive demolition site. That place it's really got to be rebuilt in a different way.
Do you plan to help rebuilding Gaza?
I might. You know, Gaza is interesting. It's a phenomenal location. On the sea, best weather. You know, everything's good. It's like some beautiful things could be done with it, but
yeah.
Wow.
First point, yeah. How 2 points, Ray. One of them is that he said this is not our war, it's their war. And the second part, he was just talking about the rebuilding Gaza. I don't know for Gazans or for settlers, but I assume that he's talking about the settlers.
Well, one really negative note here is that Trump has rescinded the restrictions that had been put on Israeli settlers who were clearly violating the rights of Palestinians and shown to have been doing. So even Biden didn't rescind that, but Trump has. So that's another indication that he will be beholden to those who pay his rent, so to speak. Let me go back. You know, one of my advantages is that I go back several decades, okay? Let me go back to George W. Bush Jr., okay? Now, how is it that the Israelis have this hold on presidents? When George W. Bush was governor of Texas, he went on one of those sponsored trips to Israel, and Ariel Sharon, that big, tough guy that murdered so many people in Lebanon by his direct order. He took Bush on a helicopter ride over Gaza and the West Bank. And when Bush reported to his cabinet at the first cabinet meeting, he said, Sharon showed me that, and boy, that was a terrible thing. Forget about fixing that one. No hope for rebuilding Gaza or anything. And by the way, how many think that we should give Sharon his lead? Everybody, including Colin Powell. Colin Powell did have the presence of mind to say, well, now, Mr. President, that could lead to real problems. And all right, everybody's on board. Good, we'll go ahead. Well, you know what happened next? In deference to Israel, we started that war in Iraq and other places. Jeffrey Sachs has made that clear. Now, what does that mean? That means that these Israelis are famous to being tough guys. And of course, Netanyahu is the same as Sharon. So we got two tough guys now. We got Trump and we got Netanyahu. And who has the initiative here? Netanyahu does. And is he going to defy Trump? Well, if past is precedent, yeah, he's going to. And that, I think, is why Trump is saying, it's their war, it's not our war, okay? So it's pretty cynical. Yeah, it's a great place for real estate development. My son-in-law is in on that, and we have lots of settlers who are ready to rebuild right on the beach. The heck with the rest of Gaza. It's uninhabitable now, to the shame of Americans. And of course, Netanyahu and his previous defense chief are under indictment for war crimes for the World Court of Justice. So I don't know. Trump has a lot of big boy stuff to live down. He's got to realize that the U.S. is not preeminent anymore, much less exceptional or even indispensable. And if he gets some realistic analysis from people who are willing to tell him the truth, he's a pretty bright guy. It's not going to take him very long to realize what the real situation in Ukraine, for example, is. And if you take 1 million Russian soldiers killed, and he's told, Mr. President, our best estimate is 1/10 of that, like 100,000. If you're talking 1 million, well, the Ukrainian killed and wounded in action, that's close to 1 million right there. So somebody either made a mistake manipulating your data, or they told you wrong. Be advised, you get rid of these people. Get in people who tell you the truth without fear or favor, without fear of you cashiering them if they tell the truth. There are some people left like that. We'll have to see if the people that he wants to put in place get confirmed now that they're nominated.
Yeah, talking about Trump executive order, it seems that Trump wants to clean up the intelligence community. What's that about, Ray?
Well, Trump has had 4 years plus of the intelligence community. Now, you may recall that when he was president-elect in 2017, the date was 2 January, Senator Chuck Schumer called up Rachel Maddow and said, Rachel, I want to come on your show. Said, okay. So you could see the tape. He says, Rachel, I got something really important to tell you. And she said, oh, what is that, Chuck? Well, I thought that Trump was a smart guy, a clever businessman, and he wouldn't bite off more than he could chew. But he's taken on the intelligence community. And they have 6 ways to Sunday to get back at you. So, whereas I thought he was clever, he's made a really big mistake. And Rachel says, oh, Rachel doesn't say, do you mean, Senator Schumer, that? No, she doesn't say that. She says, oh, okay. Now, that was the 2nd of January. Trump was not inaugurated for the first time until 18 days later, if my arithmetic is correct. And meantime, Obama got together with Biden, Brennan, Comey, and the rest of them, pardon me for a second, and plotted to show Trump who was boss. They had this cockamamie intelligence assessment, which said that the Russians helped Trump win the election. And besides that, they had other scurrilous things about how Trump was in communication with the Russians, okay? Now, that was produced on the 6th of January, so 4 days after Schumer's warning. At that same meeting with all these people I just mentioned, the president said, now, Mr. Comey, you have that P tape. You have that tape which shows that Trump was being urinated upon by prostitutes in that hotel in Moscow. So, yeah, why don't you show him that tape? Because you're meeting him tomorrow, and just so he knows, okay? So that happens. After Brennan and Comey and the head of NSA at the time meet with President to show him this finished memo, which was that day released to the press, saying that the Russians hacked into DNC communications, the Russians interfered at the election, otherwise Hillary would have won. That's what this memo said, completely bogus. After that, then Comey says, now, gentlemen, I have something really sensitive to discuss with the president. Would you leave now? And they do. And Comey says, now, Mr. President, I don't know how to say this because this is really scurrilous, but and we don't have it confirmed yet. But there is these reports that you were in a Moscow hotel and compromised in such and such a way. And it's being in the press now. It'll be released. And so just so you know, Mr. President, just so you know. Now, that's the 6th of January. Here's Trump. One thing Schumer got right is that Trump was unwise to the ways of Washington. Trump should have said, Mr. Comey, thank you so much. Go back and empty out your desk drawer. I'll give you 5 days to get out of here. Get out of here. That means get out of Washington. I know this trick. It's played on all kinds of presidents. This is really beyond the pale. Get out of here, okay? Instead of that, Trump says, oh, I think I can persuade Comey to be on my side. He spends the next couple of months trying to get Comey on his side, while Comey is authorizing these illegal wiretaps on Trump and the rest of them. So that's Trump's experience with the intelligence community. And it's not only the FBI, it's the CIA, it's the National Security Agency, and it's that new Department of Homeland Security. They're all there, okay? Now, if he gets Tulsi Gabbard in to head up all these agencies, there could be change. There's questions as to whether she will be confirmed for a lot of these same reasons. Why would she not be confirmed? Well, I'll tell you one reason. Because the FBI has the book on all these people, okay? And I don't mean just on Tulsi Gabbard. I mean on every one of those senators that will be voting whether or not to confirm her, okay? Now, it would not be the first time where all this dirt would be dragged out, and a lot of senators would prefer to remain somewhat innocent than to vote for Tulsi Gabbard. So I think it's only a 50-50 chance that she'll be approved. And so what that means depends on who Trump brings in. So it's really touch and go. And the indications are that the deep state is well prepared to deal with this as they were in 2017, okay? And one evidence of that is an article that came out 3 days ago in Foreign Affairs, which when I was in graduate school was the place to go to know about foreign affairs, okay? No more, for God's sake. Well, this article is about Peter Schroeder, okay? And he used to be a deputy national intelligence officer, you know? Matter of fact, he was that when Bush Jr. was planning all these things about Ukraine and all that kind of stuff. So his credentials are dubious in my. But what does he say? He says, here it is. I wanted to make sure I had this in case you asked. This is in this intelligence, in the foreign affairs. It's called Disruption and Demands for Loyalty to Trump Would Undermine National Security. The whole tenor of this thing is, look, we don't have to be loyal to the President of the United States. We have our own axes to grind, and we're going to grind them. Here's a quote. The intelligence community has numerous mechanisms it can use to make it harder for Trump's team to misuse intelligence in ways that go beyond advancing policy objectives. They are the ones that have developed parallel to the CIA's unique roles and authorities. Much of the intelligence community's work will continue in the shadows, no matter what policies Trump pursues. Period. End quote. Whoa! Now, this person is kind of a nothing. He works for one of these think tanks that's headed by people like Fauntleroy and other people who are on the take from all these people that fund them. So Peter Schroeder is, Deputy National Intelligence Officer. Sounds big, huh? I was one of those back in the 70s, for God's sake. It was sort of big then. I don't know how big it is now. But they have to dust this guy off. He's just retired. He works for this think tank, American New Century or something like that. Look it up. It's really crass. So what am I saying here? They don't need Senator Schumer anymore. They're dusting off these alumni to throw down the cudgel and say, hey, Trump people, remember, we have our own ways of dealing with this stuff. And our work will continue in the shadows, no matter what policies Trump pursues. So be forewarned. It's really noxious, but there it is in foreign affairs. And, it's a warning to Trump. This time he knows more. This time he's trying to get some good people in there, notably Tulsi Gabbard, for all her flaws. And not only her flaws on South Asia, but her flaws on Section 702 of the FISA Act, which enables spying on all of us, okay? She changed her mind on that. Well, I don't know. I wouldn't have changed my mind, but Obama changed his mind on a similar thing in order to get to be president. So it's small wonder that she wants to be confirmed as well as nominated. For your information, Obama in 2007, when he's running, okay, he's all very firm. He says those mega telecoms, those great big telecoms, they're intercepting, they're giving telephone records and everything to our security agents. I'm going to hold them accountable as Senator Obama. John Brennan, later to become head of the CIA and very close to Obama in a very curious way, joins Obama's staff in June of 2007. What does Obama say the next week? I changed my mind on holding the giant telecoms accountable. I think they're protecting the nation, and I think they're finding terrorists, and so I'm not going to hold them accountable. So there's a direct paragraph, a direct parallel there. It was a lack of respect for the rest of us then, and it certainly exists now. And we'll see if Trump this time around, even though, well, Tulsi is the best of possible choices in my view, given all her flaws, despite all her flaws. It'll be interesting to see if Trump pulls out all the stops to get her confirmed. as well as nominated. Even if he does, I think the FBI is hard at work now, telling this and that senator, "Oh, remember, just saying, just so you know that we have this information on what you did with that lovely lady back 2000, blah blah blah." So it's going to be interesting to see if she's confirmed. I hope she is, because I can't think of anyone better, and that's a sad tale to tell.
Thank you so much, Ray, for being with us today. Great pleasure, as always.
Thank you, Nima, for giving me a chance.
My pleasure.